I'm using the expression, I'm an old hard ass. And it's my country too. And I think if we ever install the draft again, we should draft women.
Privates First Class Katie Gores, Julia Carroll, and Cristina Fuentes Montenegro became the first entry-level enlisted women Marines to complete infantry training.
In peacetime and in war, women throughout history served the United States military with strength, dedication, and honor. For more than 2 centuries, American women volunteered for military service out of desires to explore, lead, and contribute to the strength of their nation. Coinciding with the evolution of war, women's service grew in numbers and expanded in scope despite discrimination, segregation, and exclusion from full service. Both social attitudes and military policy changed as women exhibited great skill and value in military service, paving the way for the expansion of new opportunities for women to valiantly serve and protect as equal members of the armed forces.
With the Civil War looming across America, women on both sides supported their countries through work, charity, and service on the front lines. In the Union, women raised money to aid soldiers, worked in munitions factories, and served on sanitary commissions. Women who followed the soldiers out onto the battlefield were called Daughters of the Regiment, or Vivandriers. These women provided services to the camp of soldiers, and in some cases served as spies to obtain information for regiment leaders. Approximately 20,000 women served the Union Army as cooks, laundresses, and nurses. Some women took this combat service to a new level and pretended to be men in order to enlist as soldiers. Historians estimate that over 300 women disguised themselves as men to serve in combat roles. Women such as Canadian-born Sarah Edmonds, also known as Frank Thompson, and Jenny Hodgers of Illinois, also known as Albert Cashier, worked as Union soldiers using male aliases. When the war ended, the United States government recognized and honored the services of some of these brave women by awarding them military pensions and permitting them to live in veterans' homes.
In April of 1898, after the sinking of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor, sharpshooter Annie Oakley wrote to President McKinley to encourage him to consider using women in combat roles. Oakley offered McKinley a regiment of over 50 lady sharpshooters, equipped with their own ammunition and weapons to retaliate against the Spanish, should the government decide to go to war in Cuba. When the sinking of the USS Maine propelled the United States into war against Spain, District of Columbia native Dr. Anita Newcomb McGee organized the recruitment of women as nurses. Appointed as the first female acting assistant surgeon general in 1898, she was the only woman officially permitted to wear an officer's uniform. She organized the Army Nurse Corps, which officially employed nurses for the military. Though it was a step forward for women's place and space in the military, these women were considered contract labor and did not have status as members of the military. In the years following, women's roles expanded into providing potential combat support in areas of communication and clerical support. While a large-scale war erupted in Europe, America prepared itself to assist when necessary. Approximately 35,000 women served in the U.S. military during World War I. While some served as official yeomen in the Marine Corps and Navy, many others served in a less official capacity without rank as radio operators, clerical workers, typists, and stenographers. In 1917, 20-year-old Californian Bernice Smith Tongate walked into a U.S. Navy recruiting office and asked about life as an enlisted sailor. She reportedly exclaimed, "Gee, I wish I were a man, I'd join the Navy." Unbeknownst to her, recruitment poster artist Howard Chandler Christie was present, listening to the conversation, and an idea struck him. He decided to ask Tongate to model in a naval uniform for a recruitment poster. This pin-up style poster of Tongate, which showed her desire to join the Navy, was designed to attract men to enlist. Tongate decided that posing for a poster was not enough, however, and 10 days later she went back in and enlisted as a yeoman. She served in the Navy for the entire war, eventually earning the rank of Chief Yeoman after 3 years of service. The Department of Defense reports that she returned to serve in World War II as well. However, in World War II she served in the Army. Popular images of women like Tongate continue to inspire women to engage in roles supportive to men both on and off the battlefields. In 1940, while World War II raged on in Europe, American psychologist William Moulton Marston created a new superhero figure to speak to the untapped market of young female readers. In various comic issues, Wonder Woman served undercover as both a nurse and a typist for the Army. When she was able to be herself in her superheroine form, she served as a secretary to the men of the Justice League. Intended to inspire young girls of the 1940s to recognize that women could have strength and power and still conform to the social norms of tenderness, submissiveness, and peace-seeking, Wonder Woman served as a superheroine who participated in the Justice League in supportive roles to male figures, much like American women in the military served in combat supportive roles.
I am Wonder Woman. I have been my whole life. Sisterhood, truth, justice, and the American way. When you grow up idolizing Linda Carter, I mean, if you ever watch the old Wonder Womans, you get it. She's strong and she's brave, and I mean, if you're reading the comic books now, you know, she just went into the bowels of hell and even faced getting married. You know, I mean, she is so brave, and she still comes out on top in the world of the living. My gosh.
When the Japanese attacked the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, men and women across America enlisted by the thousands to serve their country in its time of need.
My senior year in high school, we had won the state football championship. Pearl Harbor happened the following day. A bunch of us went on a picnic up the Poudre River, and that's all we could talk about was what was happening in Hawaii. On Monday, we had, of course, a pep rally and congratulated the team, and they also piped in President Roosevelt's speech, and he spoke of it being a day that was marked in infamy when the Japanese attacked our forces. And so I will always remember that. The following day, 7 of the boys went down and enlisted in the Marine Corps. Eventually, there were 4 of us from our class. 2 of the gals went into the Coast Guard, and 2 of us went into the Marine Corps.
With military operations stretching across 2 oceans, Americans needed the effort of every man, woman, and child to ensure victory. While some women took jobs in war industries building airplanes, ships, and munitions, others worked on farms, helping to supply the agricultural needs of the Allied forces.
A lot of the fellows didn't like us. They thought the world was coming to the end when the Marine Corps had women of all things. But we proved ourselves, and we freed a Marine to fight. If we were not driving a truck, the work had to be done, and it would have been done by a Marine.
Approximately 150,000 women served in the Women's Army Corps, the WAC, and the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, the WAAC, during World War II. These were the first uniformed women in the United States, other than nurses, to officially serve with the Army.
My sister wants to join the WACs. What do you think of that?
She's crazy. What the devil's a woman want to be a soldier for?
Just a waste of time. This is a man's war. What sort of jobs can they do?
They worked as air controllers, typists, and telephone operators, among other positions. They traveled the world, attending to the needs of the Army, and provided crucial support for those engaged in combat. 78 members of the Army Nurse Corps and Navy Nurse Corps were captured and held as prisoners of war in the Philippines. These Angels of Bataan, as they came to be called, continued to serve nobly in nursing units in the internment camps they were held in during their years of imprisonment. In contrast to the status of women who volunteered to serve alongside the Army, women who volunteered for the Navy were treated as part of the Navy and received military status for their service. At the urging of First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, Mildred McAfee, the first woman commissioned as an officer in the Navy, directed the Women Accepted for Volunteer Emergency Service, or WAVES program. This program set the stage for nearly 80,000 women to enlist, and as many as 8,000 to serve as naval officers by the end of the war. The United States Coast Guard followed the Navy's example and started the United States Coast Guard Women's Reserve. Nicknamed SPAR, this program freed men from stateside duties so they could fight abroad. Approximately 10,000 women enlisted in SPAR. The Army Air Corps enlisted female pilots who served their country during its time of need. Despite resistance from many military leaders, women who trained as pilots served in the Women Flying Training Detachment, known as the WFTD, the Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron, and the Women Air Force Service Pilots, or WASP program.
About the end of 1942, they organized and were recruiting women pilots to help out with the war effort because of the extreme shortage of male pilots. I don't think I would have had a chance to be a WASP unless Jacqueline Cochran had been there to fight for us. And she's the one that persuaded the General Arnold to start the program. She said if there's going to be a war, we should call on the women pilots to help.
Over 1,000 female pilots transported cargo and tested airplanes for future combat missions. Although nearly 25,000 women applied to join the WASP program, slightly more than 1,000 eventually passed the training and enlisted. These well-trained pilots freed male soldiers for combat duty. This was important work, and it was also life-threatening.
One of the most scary things we did was tow targets. The plane would have a big canvas target. They'd be towing a target, and it would be used as target practice by artillery people on the ground.
Despite their heroism, these women still faced prejudices from male pilots due to their biological differences. Because of erroneous information contained in the Civil Aeronautics Administration Handbook, which stated women often fainted during their menstrual cycles, female pilots were instructed to report their monthly cycles to the flight surgeon and to avoid flying during those times.
The training was quite difficult. We went to ground school half the day in the morning, and then we'd have flights, be on the flight line in the afternoon. And then sometimes that would be reversed. We'd fly in the morning and have ground school in the afternoon. The ground school was quite easy. I didn't have any trouble with that. But the flying was pretty strenuous. About 1/3 of each class washed out for flying deficiencies. And so we were all worried about passing our next check ride. It was a stressful 6 weeks, as well as hard physically. We were up early and flying on busy all day. It was just a very busy time. Sometimes we flew at night. We had night flying, and sometimes we would fly on weekends if we were behind in our training. I was assigned to the regional office in Kansas City. They had a 7-state region, and there were a lot of air bases in those 7 states. So that my job was to fly the inspectors, the weather forecasters, the meteorologists around each air base and check out the weather station and see if it was operating properly.
The government disbanded the WASP program in 1944. General Hap Arnold wrote a farewell letter to the WASPs, stating, When we needed you, you came through and have served most commendably under very difficult circumstances. But now the war situation has changed, and the time has come when your volunteer services are no longer needed. The situation is that if you continue in service, you will be replacing instead of releasing our young men. I know the WASP wouldn't want that. I want you to know that I appreciate your war service and that the AAF will miss you.
We felt we were doing a good job, and then all of a sudden, Congress failed to pass the legislation, and they decided to disband us, and that was a big shock. So then we went home, and the war was still going on. It was kind of difficult to know what to do.
This letter was the only gratitude many WASPs received because they were denied military benefits. It wasn't until 1977 that the government granted them status as veterans, and in 2010, they were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal.
It's a very high honor. There have only been a few organizations that have received it. They decided the time was right to try to get recognition for the WASP as the first women to fly military aircraft. We were very pleased that finally the services were accepting women for pilot training, but it took that long before we did. But we just wanted to remind people that we had done it first.
Men and women alike celebrated the end of the war and the transition back to civilian life that it promised.
It was a happy time. We were all very proud to be Americans. How could you help but be? Oh, that town was full of people, and we kind of stood back in a storefront and just watched all the activity. And of course, everybody wanted to kiss you, and so we went back to her barracks and used a lot of Listerine.
As Americans welcomed home their soldiers, nurses, and pilots with parades and fanfare, those returning were eager to start a new life back at home during peacetime.
As the U.S. military evolved during the Cold War, some attitudes towards women in the military reflected the domestic push to retain traditional gendered roles of women as homemakers. This change was reflected in 1951 when Executive Order 10240 authorized any branch of the military to discharge women who became pregnant, a mother by adoption, or have a child at home more than 30 days out of the year.
Somebody says, a skirt can't tell me what to do. And I said, this skirt can. And I said, try me. And, but I said, I tried my best to build up a trust with my guys. And I think that trust still exists, I know, because I still get Christmas cards.
There was some advancement for women as the war in Korea continued. In 1953, the Navy began assigning women to positions aboard Military Sea Transportation Service, or MSTS ships, and the Army commissioned its first female physician as a medical officer.
If you want a mountain, you create a mountain. If you want success, you create success. And if you give me a job to do, it will be done, and it will pass. And if you're worried about who I'm sleeping with, or I'm sleeping in a hot bunk or something like that, and I'll tell Joe, cool the damn thing before it's my turn to get into it, and this sort of thing. And I'm pleased to see that women can handle these ships, and they do. So it's you guys that have the doubts. We know damn well we can do it. There's no doubt in our minds.
In all, the United States sent 120,000 women to contribute to the war effort as nurses and in support roles. A total of 16 nurses on active duty died during their service either on the battlefield or en route to the battlefield. These deaths were often not reported as casualties in the war.
As the United States continued to assist nations struggling against communism, it entered into a 2-decade-long involvement in Vietnam, beginning with advisement and eventually leading to troop deployment. During the initial advisement phase, the Women Armies Corps, the WAC, or WAC, as well as other organizations, contributed to the war effort by supplying support personnel in Vietnam. Though in 1965 the Navy Nurse Corps began recruiting men, other opportunities for women developed. In 1967, Public Law 90-30 eliminated the ceiling and promotion cap for women, and in 1968 the Air National Guard began allowing women to enlist. During the conflict, Jean M. Holmes served as director of the Women in the Air Force, or WAF program, which recruited women into combat support roles. In 1965, the Marine Corps also continued to support the advancement of women in the military by promoting Master Sergeant Josephine Davis to attaché duty. Soon thereafter, she became the first female Marine to experience hostile fire. Over 7,000 women were part of the approximately 2.5 million Americans who served on active duty within the borders of Vietnam during the war. While the military remained largely male, it did evolve into a younger force. The average age of the combat soldier in World War II was 26. During the war in Vietnam, it was 19. Major differences in terrain, climate, and guerrilla warfare, combined with the naivete of youth, made this war very different for soldiers to fight when compared to the one just 2 decades earlier.
Basically all the casualties. And then one of the men that came to the emergency room had just drank a quart of alcohol, and he quit breathing, and he died just from drinking. It's like, what? Those kinds of things. I guess my surroundings there were very comfortable, comparable. I gotta take a deep breath. I think this is why I don't talk about it. I mean, they're 18. They're usually 18 to 20. They're kids, They're all blown apart. We had one place that we would put a leg or an arm. It's just... just people don't know. I mean, until you experience exactly what it causes, what it does to people, how can you say, let's go to war again, I don't get it. I just can't believe we did it the last time. I just don't. It's like, who are you sending?
Of the 58,220 Americans who died in the Vietnam conflict, 8 of them were women. These 8 nurses on active duty died during their service, either on the battlefield or traveling to the battlefield.
There was one nurse that was, killed at the 91st Evac Hospital where I was in July. And it was just like fragments that had come through the Quonset hut. And it had actually just hit her right in the neck, and it hit her carotid, and just kind of a freaky thing that she bled out, And
The many men and women on active duty in the military were usually unaware of the growing home front displays of anti-war sentiment until they returned home to find demonstrations and mixed attitudes towards returning veterans. Nevertheless, many civilian women continued to serve bravely in active duty and in civilian support roles. Just before the fall of Saigon, both military and civilian women volunteered to assist with a humanitarian effort supported by President Gerald Ford known as Operation Baby Lift, which worked to relocate South Vietnamese orphans to the United States. Tragedy struck one of these initial flights of the operation, and at least 180 children and U.S. citizens were killed. Of that number, 11 were active-duty Air Force personnel, including one female flight nurse, Captain Mary Therese Klinker.
I think I came back thinking, I don't know if I would ever go into the service again. Yeah, I think it was very controversial too, And then looking back, I mean, how old, you're 20, you're going to school. I'm not too aware of much else except studying and stuff like that. Avoiding the draft, I understood all of that. People going to Canada, protesting. There was all, yeah. Yeah, there was a lot going on everywhere.
Unlike earlier conflicts, when women were dismissed from duty when the war ended, the years after the Vietnam War saw a new dialogue about the place of women in the military. In the year following the war, the Army, Air Force, Marines, and Coast Guard promoted women into roles previously closed to them. This advancement was reflected in the 1972 passing of the Equal Rights Amendment, the ERA, in Congress. The amendment stated simply that there would be no distinction between men and women in the eyes of the government. Opponents of the ERA feared that women's traditional roles as mothers and homemakers would be threatened. They argued that such an amendment would mean that women could be drafted into the military, or they could lose gendered legal parental privileges in divorces and custody battles. Politician Phyllis Schlafly summed up the opponents' fears with her campaign slogan, "Stop," or "Stop taking our privileges." She argued that American women enjoyed many privileges, including a nation that looked upon them as nurturers and as a group to be protected. Drawing on Cold War-era fears that many Americans had about the threats to the nuclear family, as well as the growing gay awareness movement, Schlafly encouraged enough Americans to support traditional gender roles that by 1982, an insufficient number of states ratified the ERA amendment for its passing. While Americans debated the ERA, the military continued to press forward, providing opportunities for women. In 1975, the Department of Defense reversed its previous policy of discharging female members when they became pregnant or upon adoption or marriage with stepchildren. They decided to give these women in these situations permission to remain on active duty if they wished. In 1976, the Second Circuit Court ruled in Crawford v. Cushman that the Marine Corps regulation requiring the discharge of pregnant women violated the Fifth Amendment. The military accelerated the integration of women into the services when, in 1976, it abolished the WAC, WAF, WAVES, SPAR, and Women Marine programs. In 1977, veteran status was awarded to some women who served in World War II, and in 1979, enlistment qualifications were made equal between the sexes. In 1979 as well, Hazel Johnson Brown was promoted to Brigadier General in the Army, the first African-American female in history to receive such an honor. In 1980, the Defense Off Personnel Management Act, known as DOPMA, abolished gender differences in promotion procedures, which allowed women to compete with men for promotion. However, in 1981, as the debate about women's roles as mothers and caregivers rolled on, the Supreme Court ruled in Ross Kerr v. Goldberg that the exclusion of women from the draft and selective service was constitutional.
My husband and I were our partners and always have been in raising our kids, but a mother's role is different than a father's. As a mom, when you know you're not going to see your kids for an extended period of time, and that begins to hit home, it's not easy. You kiss them harder every night, and as a pediatric nurse, I knew that on a developmental basis, I'd be missing a lot of the developmental stages of my little girl at 17 months. You know, if I was gone for a year, I'd miss all those stages of her life. But, you know, you're committed. You go.
From 1984 to 1986, the academies of the Navy, Coast Guard, and Air Force all made history with women graduating at the top of their class. Slowly, the tide of exclusion began to turn. In 1988, the Department of Defense adopted the RISK rule, which provided the branches of the military to analyze specific units for possible exclusion of women. Those units that supported combat activity were closed to women. Approximately 30,000 new positions opened, however, for women in other non-combat units. In 1989, 770 women joined the invasion of Panama in Operation Just Cause. Women were pilots of Black Hawk helicopters, and one woman, Captain Linda Bray, led a group of soldiers into combat. It was her brave leadership that sparked further discussion about the role of women in combat. During the Persian Gulf War, Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm, the U.S. deployed the largest number of women in history. 40,782 soldiers were women, comprising roughly 7% of the total deployment. During the conflict, 2 women were held as prisoners of war, and 15 women were killed. In 1992, the House Armed Services Committee held a hearing to investigate gender discrimination in the military as a whole. By 1993, the National Defense Authorization Act repealed the prohibitive restrictions on women in combat aircraft of the Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps. The Department of Defense repealed the 1988 risk rule and put in its place a new directive that women were to be excluded from assignments that are primarily ground combat missions. As society debated the issues of sexual harassment in the civilian world, so did the military. In 1987, Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger led an investigative group to evaluate reports that women faced sexual harassment and fewer opportunities than men while on active duty. This group continued investigation for several years.
I did have military sexual trauma. I was assaulted. And, it's not something that I want to relive and rehash, but it gives me the understanding. And, because there's this spectrum between sexual harassment and rape, and there's everything in between. And I think every woman in the military has experienced something along that continuum.
You just have to be confident in who you are and what you're about. And then if you do suffer some gender discrimination, you just need to set them straight in a hurry. Now, I know there are plenty of women who have had it far worse. And for them, the technique I chose probably would not have worked.
In 1991, Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney ordered all services to engage in a zero-tolerance policy regarding sexual harassment.
So I asked for a pen and paper, and I wrote 5 pages of exactly what had been happening to me. When I handed it to somebody, that's the last time I ever saw those 5 pages. I'm sure the doctor read them. I was prescribed a high dose of trazodone, and he said, "This will help you sleep." So, of course I'm not sleeping. I'm being, even though I'm being forced to do something, it's still sexual assault. I even considered maiming while I considered separating his member with my teeth.
Despite the changes, the situation hasn't improved much. It was reported that in 2012, soldiers were 15 times more likely to be raped by a fellow soldier than killed by an enemy. In response to a Department of Defense report that an estimated 86% of cases of sexual assault were unreported, Congress put into place an act that criminalizes assault in the military, placing those charged up against dishonorable discharges.
I think military sexual trauma is something that has been around, but I think now that leadership is finally starting to show that they do care and they will take the appropriate steps to take care of the men and women who are experiencing military sexual trauma. I think we will see an increase in the number of people coming forward who experienced it, and I also think that we will see an increase in the amount of leadership support that we get from the Department of Defense and the Department of Veterans Affairs for this type of thing.
President Barack Obama gave the branches of the military 1 year to improve their prevention and response strategies for sexual harassment and assault.
Over the last decade, more than 225,000 women have deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. Women currently comprise more than 214,000, nearly 15% of the military forces.
My role was to be a platoon leader for a Shadow Tactical Unmanned Aerial Vehicle unit. And what that is the remote-controlled drone spy planes that the Army had back then. This is actually a propeller that flew on one of my Shadow TUAVs while we were deployed to Iraq. It was given to me by my soldiers when I left as their platoon leader. And here, this is actually the logo that was created for our platoon. Has OIF 3, Camp Tajia, Iraq, which is where we served. And then our platoon logo, which was damn near gods, because we really were damn near gods.
Though healthcare still was the most common role for women in the military in 2012, more than half of them served in various roles, including unofficial combat roles. Women advanced into front lines and leadership roles as well.
Only because we were so visible. Our deployment almost got canked. because they saw all of our reports and they're like, wait, women shouldn't be in firefights. Women shouldn't be, getting blown up or mortared or whatever. This is against our rules. Until we showed them what our capabilities were, and we were highly visible.
In 2011, Marsha Anderson became the first African-American female to be promoted to Major General. In 2013, there were 69 female generals and admirals. New military units utilize women's strengths and serve to advance the mission of the United States while assisting communities across the globe. Built on the historic tradition of female groups within the military and utilizing the strengths and modern training of women, the Marine Corps created female engagement teams. These teams assist in situations where female soldiers can communicate beyond the cultural barriers that male soldiers may have a more difficult time crossing.
In a different culture, you have to adapt to that culture. We were in a Muslim culture. Males weren't allowed to touch females. Males were not allowed to look at females. They were always covered up. If you've ever seen pictures of Iraqis or Afghan women, they're generally covered from head to toe. You can't even see their face. When we went into Iraq, there was a lot of conflict there, just mainly because of the cultural differences. Lioness program was created so females can get attached to infantry units to stand at like entry points or checkpoints or go out and just help search females or talk to them, their families and stuff. Female engagement team grew off of that.
These groups are very different than their predecessors because in these, women are armed and are often under threat.
The exclusion law was still in effect. We're not allowed to be, quote unquote, at the tip of the spear. It's not how we were supposed to be. Somehow we managed to go around that law and do a job. We were used because grunts can only talk to the guys, so they only had half the picture. They're only talking to the elder guys or the middle-aged guys, and then we would talk to all the kids and all the families, so we get the big picture, and that was our whole point. The lines were blurred because OEF wasn't necessarily a close seek and destroy. It was more of a, hey, let's rebuild Afghanistan the way you want it.
Would I join the Army again? Yes, in a heartbeat. I would not hesitate 1 second because I know the type of person that I've become because of the military, the lessons that I've learned, and definitely the people that I've met.
So you gotta weigh all the pros and cons before you sign on the dotted line. I would. I would.
Sure. But I don't walk too fast. I think the military has a great deal to offer so many young people that really don't know where they're going. And certainly a hitch in the service gives them direction, gives them self-discipline, all those things that gives them the pride of their appearance. And I think it's a good thing.
On January 24, 2013, U.S. Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta removed the ban on women in combat roles. The branches of the U.S. military vary in their plans to integrate women into combat areas. The Pentagon is taking this change seriously and dedicated $15 million to develop body armor that is designed specifically for women.
I would tell to any woman or any girl who wants to join the military, if they feel like they can do it and want to experience it, then go out and do it. Do your best, represent women the best you can, and don't be afraid of being a woman serving in a very heavily male-dominated industry.
Oh, I think it's always beneficial to have women in a mix, or even as a nurse when it was mostly women. I always think it's good to have a man in the mix too. I say everyone should get to do what they want to do. Oh, that's the best. But I think females are very strong. A powerful female is a good thing.
Be all that you can be, because there's opportunities out there. And if you qualify to be a missileer, be a missileer.
You'll hear a lot of dissenting opinions from women who have been sexually harassed, who have been sexually assaulted. Yes, that does happen, and it's horrible, and the military is working to stamp that out. However, most of us haven't. Most of us have had great careers. Most of us have had very satisfying careers. You can do a lot in the military. You will find out things about yourself that you can do, things about yourself that you can't do, and you have to learn how to accept those too. There's a graceful way and a belligerent way. You really learn who you are and what you're made of. You learn tremendous tolerance and patience, and you learn tremendous confidence as well. I would say absolutely do it. There's education benefits that come with it. There are career skill training that go with it. You meet people from all over the world, from all different walks of life. It's really an experience that can't be traded. Totally worth it. Absolutely do it.
These changes continue to spark debate among both men and women about the role of women in combat. As women demonstrate physical, intellectual, and emotional skill for combat and leadership roles, old norms and prejudices are fading into history. Changes in social norms, policy, and technology inspire continued examination of women's place and space in military service and leadership.
The front lines have been blurred for a very long time, and it's just a matter of having that signature to say that women can finally be acknowledged for the work that they've already been doing. As far as mental capacity, women can do it. Physical capacity, if they have the strength and are able to physically do it, then let them do it.
The whole point of having women, having that law changed was to give women, again, it comes back to equal opportunity. It's not that we necessarily want to go out and, carry big guns and shoot people. It's the opportunity to be promoted alongside of our male counterparts, our peers, to have that opportunity to serve in a combat position where you're making those decisions, where you have the opportunity to really make a difference and make those decisions that are literally life and death decisions. And that is the career path to senior leadership.
Through history, women have served in combat fields. It wasn't until the turn of the 19th century when public sentiment was so against women getting hurt. Women have been getting hurt for centuries in every culture except ours, and ours here in the United States as well. Women have served in the military all through time. It wasn't until in the very recent history when news media made it possible for people to communicate quickly and clearly what was happening in the horrors of a battlefield. Gettysburg was extremely well documented. And to think that women, the givers of life, how could they be takers of life? We had to protect them, their home and hearth and mom and all that. You can't have them out there. They might get hurt. Newsflash, we've been getting hurt a very long time. Women are fine soldiers. We will fiercely protect what is ours. We will fiercely defend the homeland. And it's about time, because women can do these things.
Like I said, every woman's experience is differently, but can women handle combat? Absolutely. But I think it depends on the woman.
As we've seen through the generations of females in war or in military life, it's just getting progressively better for equality, I guess you could say. And there's the next step. They have to bring it up the level that we did.
I'm all for it. I was glad to see that it happened, that it's now being allowed. We're just as ready, willing, and capable as our male counterparts.
Now, there are some women who are better at it than others. Go back to the beginning of our talk, when everyone has to find their place. The way the military is divided up, there are some very demanding physical roles. Your infantrymen in the Army and the Marine Corps. The Navy has special sectors. The Air Force has special sectors which require people of unique and expanded physical abilities. And I'm completely fine with women doing that if they can perform to those standards that are set. The standards I don't think should be changed for women. Nothing should be dumbed down, downgraded, or diluted. The job requires that level of proficiency, and that's the level of proficiency you should be able to bring to the table if that's what you want to do. And nothing says a woman can't do it. Her own physiology may dictate that one way or the other, but if she truly wants to do that, she'll find a way to do it. And if she wants to do that but can't, she'll have to find something else to which she is better suited physically. So absolutely, I think that was a good decision.
I think having diversity within our military ranks is very important, whether it's for women, minorities. The recent repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell is a huge stepping stone as well for the military. Providing those opportunities for anybody who wishes to join, I think is a step forward for our military. Things like Don't Ask, Don't Tell, or women in combat roles, I think they're long past due.
By being a success, perhaps I was made it possible for someone else to come in to say, women can do this or that or the other. If I had failed, then they say all women will fail. And because I think sometimes we're all judged as one, whereas I would rather you say you're a pain in the butt and talking about me and not all of us. We have modern days. We don't want to go back to where it was when I came in. We should progress.